Terminator Genisys is easily the third best Terminator film, beating 3 and Salvation, which, going by those two films, isn't saying much, let's be honest. Well, it's not without its faults, and the big criticism of one is that it changes out Terminator 1, and not for the better, and it cancels out Terminator 2 entirely, which, if it was true, would be fucking terrible. From here on out, there are going to be spoilers for Terminator Genisys and the entire Terminator series. In Terminator Genisys, Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese jump over the point at which Terminator 2 would be set and of the time Judgment Day would occur. As the Terminator from 1984's body was disposed of, and its chip used in the time machine, there's nothing Cyberdyne research can use to create Skynet. This means in this timeline, the events of Terminator 2 cannot occur. But does that stop them existing in the series? Let's take a closer look. Now the first thing we have to do is set out what the ground rules are for Terminator time travel. We're going to have to assume that all the Terminator films work off the same rules. When looking at the rules of time travel in the Terminator series, there are two possibilities. Option 1. A closed loop. The events of the Terminator always happened. 1984, Skynet was created from the remains of the Terminator sent back from 2029. Kyle Reese was always the father of John Connor. This is a grandfather paradox. The events of 2029 need to happen to create the events of 1984. They are all set in stone. The events of Terminator 2 happen later on in the same timeline, then Terminator 3, then Terminator Salvation. All the time travel was just closing the loop. It was always set to happen. So John is wrong when he says there is no fate but what we make. The changes they were trying to make were history all along. This would mean that Terminator Genisys does come along, and by changing the events of Terminator 1, just completely overwrites the entire Terminator story. Or there's a second option. Option 2, that every time someone travels back through time, they are not going back to their own past, but to a separate alternate reality that has been created by their use of time travel. While a lot of things are similar to what would have originally been happening at that time in the past, their actions change it. First result of the alternate reality theory. There was an original timeline that led to the 2029 where Skynet lost the war and sent the T-800 from Terminator 1 back into the past. This created a new timeline. These things were not already history. This was the first time the Terminator was sent back, and it was sent back into an alternate reality. This means there was an original timeline where John Connor was not fathered by Kyle Reese, and Skynet was developed in some other way, not requiring the Terminator's chip. In this timeline, John Connor had no knowledge of time travel. He was just able to beat them because he's hardcore. Then the events of Terminator 1 happen, change the future, now Connor has foreknowledge. Then all the other times that anyone travels back, they travel back to an alternate timeline. Each time they attempt to close the loop and save or kill any Connor family members, they ascend themselves to an alternate reality, not affecting their own. Okay, let's have a closer look at these theories. Well, the closed loop. While Terminator 1 is a closed loop, with both Skynet and the human resistance inadvertently creating themselves, the rest aren't. Terminator 2 abort Skynet, which isn't closing the loop. As we've seen from Terminator 1, the future scenes do in fact happen. If Terminator 2 successfully stops Judgment Day, those events can't have occurred. The closed loop would be broken. Terminator 3 uses an excuse to realign time, but Judgment Day is late, which would change the time that the war ended and Skynet sent Terminators back. It changed the origin of Terminator 1 entirely. This would make Terminator 1 as a film discontinuity, if in fact there was only one possible timeline. Terminator Genisys starts from the same starting point as put out in the Terminator 1 opening text, 2029. Ergo, Terminator 3 and Terminator 4 have not changed its timeline. This is not a closed loop, so we can probably discount that theory. Okay, point 2. Alternate realities. There are a lot of things that point to Terminator 2 and Terminator Genisys being in completely separate timelines. Therefore, changing the timeline of Terminator Genisys will not affect Terminator 2's timeline. The events of Terminator 2 do still occur, and they're just as canon as the events of Terminator Genisys, even though they're not in that one film. The OG timeline, John Connor, didn't know how to beat Skynet because of foreknowledge, he was just that damn good. When the T-800 and Kyle Reese went back to 1984, they created a new reality. This led to an alternate timeline when John Connor was time travel smart and descended from Kyle Reese. This also led to a more dangerous Skynet based on T-800 hardware, which was able to develop the T-1000s. Skynet uses a time displacement device to send back both the T-800 to 1984 and the T-1000 to the 1990s. TechCom sends back Kyle Reese and Uncle Bob. Who does have foreknowledge is John Connor, who believes he does have to close a loop, sending Kyle Reese back to impregnate his mum. Instead, they're creating a new timeline. The chip from the T-800 isn't creating Skynet in its own timeline, but in another timeline. As far as we know, that timeline would have been the same as the original until the T-800 jumped in. Whoever jumps back into the past doesn't affect their own timeline at all. So where does Terminator Genisys fit in that? Terminator Genisys follows a post-Terminator 1 timeline, where John Connor does have future knowledge and is Kyle Reese's kid. It can't be the original pre-Terminator 1 timeline because he does have knowledge about the future. But in this timeline, the T-1000 isn't there to send back. This has changed from Terminator 2, as instead the Terminator 3000 is Skynet's final insurance. That leaves the question, if Skynet wasn't sending the T-1000 back, then why is the one in Terminator Genisys? And we'll get to that in a little bit. The events of all the films exist, but they're in separate timelines. The events of Terminator 2 jumped over in Terminator Genisys, but it still exists as canon, and it exists as alternate timelines without cancelling each other out. Therefore, all the other timelines also exist separately without cancelling each other out. So, Terminator Genisys does not delete Terminator 2. Well, that's everything wrapped up in a nice big bow, right? If you just want a simple answer, that was it. 'Cause here's where it gets weird.